hearing from Mr. Craig Mayer, who has produced a report that says extingent economic risk and inadequate due diligence regarding the Bermuda Airport Development project. And he's also produced a response to the Ministry of Finance's financial comparisons document on the impacts of the net present value of the various options on the government of Bermuda's the government of Bermuda. So I will open to Mr. Mayer in case he has any introductory statements to make, and then we will go straight into the lines of questioning. Mr. Mayer.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon. And before you begin, I want to make sure that you, for the record, and of course for the members of the media, and also Burn News, that you, I guess, give your background so people can know that you might know what you're speaking about.
My name, as you can gather, is Craig Mayer. I'm a chartered accountant. I started my career with Cooperson Lybrand, working in Toronto, Bermuda, and London for several years. Following that, I had a brief stint with Mobil Oil, where I was involved in international finance. And after that, I spent the last 20 years of my life with a very large company, net worth in excess of $3 billion, very diversified geographically and in industries. And there I reported to the chairman and founder and had a number of responsibilities, including negotiation and administration of the group's credit facilities with international institutions. And for the last 10 years, I've been suffering retirement. And here I am. Okay. Is the project value for money? That's $1 million question, but when we look at the analysis, it's pretty easy to look through it. St. Helena is a small island 2,000 miles from the southwest coast of Africa, few inhabitants, and has never had an airport until recently. And after many years of planning, an airport was designed and built. People built retail outlets in expectation of tourism, and it was due to open this June. The first flight was the British Airways Boeing 737. After several attempts, they found that it was impossible to land the plane without huge risk of crash, danger, losing control of the plane, because there are mountains and there are wind shears that affect constantly the runway. That airport remains closed to commercial traffic, and there's no prospect of its opening. Incredible, huh? Closer to home in Bermuda, we all know about a project called the Grand Atlantic, where our government built condominiums, and after some time, they were only able to sell one unit, and its future remains unknown. Millions of dollars spent for nothing. 335 million pounds loaned by the British government to the people of St. Helena to build that airport, and it's of no value. How does this happen? What's going on? It happens because people who take on projects do not do their homework. They don't look at the problems, define the problems, look for alternative solutions to those problems, evaluate those problems in order to determine what the best solution is. They failed at St. Helena to understand the weather patterns. They failed in Bermuda to get the market conditions and other factors right. Without due diligence, all else can fail. Decisions are built on bad information. So, how do we do? There were mentions earlier about Deloitte and the letter of entrustment. Let's look at what Deloitte said about our due diligence in this case. I'm going to read it to you. Key integral steps are not present in the case. These include an economic assessment of a defined list of options to identify the most economically advantageous solution for Bermuda. What does that mean? It means that the government did not look at the option to repair Wade. They left it. They decided that they should build a new airport, and they proceeded on that basis. They did not look at the cost of putting the roof on, fixing the sewage, dealing with the surge problems. They didn't look at it. They moved on. Those are the words. They're plain and simple English. What does the letter of entrustment say? The Commonwealth Office, the Foreign Commonwealth Office of the UK, believes that the continued deterioration of Bermuda's fiscal situation is a cause for significant concern. And taking on board more debt is unlikely to provide a sustainable solution over the long term. The government must publish a written and evidence-based assurance that the required measures identified by Deloitte have been taken before the contract can be signed. It couldn't be more condemning than that. Deloitte and the UK government, we have not done our homework, not at that point in time. So, were we able to determine on that basis the best solution or whether the project was affordable? According to those two documents, no. Let's look at another angle of this. I was at Gatwick the other day. All the wires and the covering and the pipes were down for an extensive part of the terminal. It was a mess. I noticed the poor decay of some of the facilities there. Do you think that the Gatwick operators would say to themselves, as the Bermuda government did, it's old, it's run down, we've got problems, we're past our expiry date. Knock it down and build a new one. If the Southampton Princess Hotel, bring it closer, got close to its expiry date, and it had all these problems, do you think that the Fairmont hotels would decide in a boardroom meeting to knock it down and build a new one without looking at all the pros and cons, the costs of repairing it and continuing it? I don't think so. Our problems at Wade, the bigger problems, are the roof, the flooding, and the sewage. And the expiry date, of course. Flooding. The HNTB report in 2006 said, Wade can be protected from Category 4 storm surge by building a berm. No qualifications, it can be done. They built a berm, but it doesn't seem to be high enough to do the job. What would it cost, if it can be done, to raise the height of the berm to a level that it does stop the surge? What is the problem with the roof? You know, when my roof leaks, and anybody else's roof here leaks, I get it fixed. I don't tolerate the drip. I don't watch it get worse. I don't watch it happen elsewhere. I get it fixed. I don't wait a year, 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years. What have we done as a government to try and fix that, and what would it cost? What would it cost if we decided to keep and repair the airport, to build a whole new roof if that was necessary? Not been looked at. Sewage. We're told about the smell of sewage. I was speaking to, well, first of all, the report says that sewage is not a problem, the 2006 plan, as long as the pumping, the sewage pumping, is continued on a routine basis. I spoke to a traffic warden who's been there for 7 years 2 weeks ago, works till 7, and she said, oh yeah, sewage. Oh, they only come around once or twice a year, not very often, to pump the sewage. What could we do if we pumped regularly? And what could we do if we made some modifications to the system if necessary? What would it cost? And so we haven't, from that standpoint, properly identified our problems and our opportunities with upgrades at Wade, looked at the costs, put it all together as a cost benefit, and compared that to the situation with building a new airport. We don't know. Affordability. The cost of some of the undiscounted cash flows to build this new airport is not $885 million as described in the MOF memo on financial cost comparisons. It's $885, whatever it is, plus $810 million, as was discussed earlier, of lost revenue and expense. We're giving away $37 million of revenue to ACON. We're giving away expenses. We're retaining some. The net amount is $27 million a year. That adds up to $810 million. What have we evaluated in terms of being affordable, in terms of debt metrics? 885 is no comparison to 1.4. I don't think we've done it right. So why is the Foreign Commonwealth Office concerned about our fiscal deterioration and sustainable state? We're not sustainable in their eyes or in raters' eyes if we continue to add deficit and add debt and see our interest costs rise and our ratings decline. At some point, we cross the line where we fail to make our payments and we default. Moody's and S&P have both said in the last 15 months that their main concern about the creditworthiness of this country is the unsustainable growing level of debt. It's very clear that that's what they say. If we can't eliminate our deficits, we're going to cross that line and we're going to be forever trying to come back if our economy collapses. So let's just look very quickly. I hope you have a page there that summarizes the debt and the target debt. Have you all got this page? Very quickly. During the last 8 years in the first table, we have run up a deficit of $2.4 billion. We have spent 9.8, and we have earned 7.4.
I know. Can you see it? Which one?
Yeah, the one with the tables. It had two tables on it. Yeah.
This one.
Yes.
The one that says net debt and deficit 2009, 2016 at the top?
Yeah, it says revenues going across the top from 2009 to 2016.
Okay, yeah, we got it.
Okay. So in the last 9 years, 2009 to 2016, we have spent, as a government, $9.8 billion. We have received revenues of $7.4 billion. We have spent 32% more than we have earned throughout the last 8 years. And that, as I say, has produced a net deficit of $2.4 billion, which is represented by our borrowing today. As a consequence of that, the net debt has grown sevenfold from $335 million in 2009 to $2.4 billion today. Staggering. And at the end of April, our net debt position was apparently $2.4 billion, which is 3 times the sustainable level of debt that has been prescribed by the Fiscal Responsibility Panel, who were brought in by the government to help us find a way out of this mess that we're in. We were 3 times the level of affordable, sustainable debt. So what happens when we have a recession, which a lot of this was driven by, as we did during the last 8 years? Our revenues remained pretty much unchanged during that period. They fluctuated, but they averaged $921 million. Our expenses ran between around $1.22 billion. They basically started and ended at the same value. So we had an average deficit during the last 8 years of $300 million. And you wonder why we're in trouble with our debt rising 7 times, and our interest being what it is today, and our debt today being 3 times what's deemed sustainable. So if we run into another prolonged recession, stroke depression, as we've just done, and we can't increase our revenues and we can't change our expenses, that amount of deficit, net deficit that we're incurring year after year will go straight on to our cumulative debt, and it will bring our ratings down accordingly. Okay. So the other part of this is the ability to pay this down, which is very, very important, to reduce the existing $2.4 million debt to the net target. Along the top there in the columns, I show what happens with 3% revenue growth, 2%, 1%, and 0. If in the first column we are able to grow our revenues 3% a year, every year, on top of that's a compound rate, which I don't think many countries, certainly not Bermuda, will be able to do. It's a huge challenge. And if we could keep our expenses frozen, no change in the expenses, it will take us 17 years to pay down that $2.4 million debt to what is deemed to be the sustainable level. And the sustainable level is defined simply as revenues times 0.8. That's what the Fiscal Responsibility Panel have prescribed. If our revenues slipped from 3% to 2% with no changes in expenses, it will now take us 24 years to pay down our debt.
No, Mr. Mayor, I don't want to cut you off, but we're slow on time. We don't have much time. We want to get to questions on the airport.
So it's going to be a long, long move to pay down our debt. And if there's any slippage or change in revenues or expenses, it just pushes it out. Just want to remind people what the consequences of default are. We reach a point of default where we cannot honor our obligations to pay our debt or our interest. That means instantly all of Bermuda's debt, all of our borrowings, $2.4 billion, are worthless. They are graded as junk. That means that nobody will want to lend to us. We can't borrow any further. And the next step in the private sector, you will find that international business will move out of Bermuda and relocate because their tax-free earnings are no longer secure. With a government that's bankrupt, they're under threat of taxation, which means that our economy will contract notably, and we will find that we have massive unemployment. People with no hope of any other work because there is no other industry. They can't fish, they can't make hula hoops, they can't do anything to seek employment. So we must stay away from default, we must stay away from that line, we must do everything to avoid getting any closer to that line. Our minister says we are approaching bankruptcy. He means we're approaching default. We are close to this line. We mustn't spend on a big basis. We must reduce expenses. We must stay away from that line because that will be the end of our socioeconomic well-being as we know it. That's not scaremongering, that's fact.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, just so you're aware, the main item of which we're going to review today, of course, is the financial comparison and the various options, and I know that you provided some information for that. I'm going to ask one question, and given how short on time we are, I'll let a few other persons ask some questions. The first question that I want to ask or refer to, the statement of which you gave, and this is a memorandum which was sent to the Public Accounts Committee and was also sent, I think, to the Premier, the Acting Governor, and the Deputy Director for Overseas Territories when you're speaking about the airport redevelopment options. And on point one, you said that the government-to-government costs are understated by $810 million. So the government-to-government costs in this document are listed on page, let me find it. The financial comparisons document is on page 7. On page 9. And on page 9, you're saying that the government-to-government costs are understated by $810 million. And you're saying the cost of transferring net revenues to Project Co. of $27 million a year were omitted from the government-to-government and DBFOM options. Consequently, the government-to-government total undiscounted cash flow costs reported by Ministry of Finance at $585 million are understated by $810, and this should have been reported as $1.3 billion as opposed to what it was reported as is 440. And what you were basically saying is errors of this magnitude are inexcusable. Could you please explain to us why you state that the government has understated the revenue or understated the cost to the government by that amount of money?
The government, until this transaction takes place, is receiving revenues of $37 million a day, of which
a year,
of which 25 million are from departure tax revenues, 11.8 are from what they call airport operations, and it's incurring costs of about $20 million a year. Under the plan, the government will give away all of the revenues, all $37 million, and it will retain $10 million of expense for airport ops. They call it airport ops. This means that we will transfer as a consideration, as the payment to ACON, a net $27 million a year. It's gone. Our net cash flow will be diminished by $27 million a year. Our deficits will be increased by $27 million a year. It's gone. It's a cost of, that's what we're paying to buy this airport. That's the main component, and it adds up to $810 million over 30 years. I wrote this report because I wanted to illustrate matters of due diligence that the government does not seem to have looked at. I don't take a position one way or the other about whether we should build or repair. But it seems to me, from the amount of work that I've done, that we really need to find out what it would cost to repair the airport and make it sustainable for some period of time. And I suspect, now that I know the costs are $1.4 billion, and I see the lack of due diligence, the lack of homework to justify any of this, I just sense that as Bermudians have expressed, and Bermudians have lots of common sense, most people think we don't need this airport. And I have to say that I have to believe that if you do your homework, we're doing the wrong thing. I started out this process by not taking the position. I'm trying to illustrate important things that we should look at. I'm not qualified to say whether we would or we shouldn't, but my hunch is that we should repair. But the issue of due diligence is that this government did not look at the outset of whether there was an alternative to repair and what that might cost and what the cost benefits might be. It just said, let's build, let's get on with it. So they haven't done that homework. Of course, they've done a lot of work with CCC-ACON reviewing what's proposed, but they got the foundation wrong. They can't say it's better or worse. Just like you looked at all the things involved in keeping, upgrading, knocking down and building because you did some work. They haven't done it according to Deloitte.
MP Ferber?
Yeah, thank you. One thing, first of all, let me thank you for what you've done. Your voice and Mr. Birchall's voice of the community is very clear as far as the concern about debt. And I think if any one of us, we all should be concerned in the direction the country is going when it comes to debt. And in fact, as you read out more stuff and I listen to, you wonder how we can get out of this thing. One thing we are aware of is that the government never promised an airport in 2012. But what they did promise, they would get out of debt. But what we've gone is, we've gone more in debt since 2012. Matter of fact, almost 100% more than what we were at the very beginning. And so, I agree with you. There's nothing wrong in putting some cement on top of a roof and making sure the leaks doesn't happen. When I left on Sunday, I flew out and I came back yesterday, and I didn't look around and say, well, would I come to Bermuda again? We only built the arrival section in 1997, the new arrival section. And the arrival section was built for more people than we had coming in 1980, when 500,000 people were coming in the island. So I think the country needs to look at an agenda. We need to look at a clear agenda where we're going when it comes to this debt. And everyone, not everyone, because we won't get it all in, buy into where we want to be in the next 10. Do we want to be in more debt, or do we want to have a better future for our people? And so I appreciate you coming before us today, and hopefully the message can get out even more. We will be probably going to the House sometime between now and December to vote for a bill. But in fact, we'll be voting for more debt.
Yep.
That's the question that we come down to. Are we voting for a way to get out of this? But no, we'll be voting, and let's be clear. We're based on partisan line. The question would be, the question would be, no, there's no question, but I agree with the analysis that you've done, and hopefully more people, like I said, you and Mr. Birchall, will be hitting the pavement, and hopefully that we'll be able to stop this bill going forward as time goes on. Thank you.
I think you made this presentation very clear.
Do you have any questions?
I don't have a question for you, but I too would like to thank you for coming and presenting, and you did make your points very clear, and it's certainly food for thought. And I think Bermuda does need to pause and reflect on what you're sharing, and the people need to once again make their voices heard in terms of whether or not they want a new airport, and hopefully the government, in also reflecting, will perhaps find a better way, or at least prove that the path that we're on at present is the best.
Thank you, and you're most welcome.
Do you have more questions? Go ahead.
Well, firstly, let me say I don't believe, unless you have reports to say the building is condemned, I don't believe we're reaching the end of our life there. The House of Parliament in the UK is over 500 years. They're rebuilding it because it has value to the country. And they've evaluated the costs, and they say it's worth spending £1 billion to fix it because that's a trade-off. There are buildings in England and there are churches that are 300, 400, 500, 600 years old. They don't knock them down because of their expiry date. If the costs justify keeping the church, if they think it's worth it, they carry them on. So if it's worth continuing Wade and it makes sense to spend that money rather than build, let's do it. Wade and a new airport are equally susceptible to tornadoes, wind damage. One isn't any better than the other. Maybe the roof is a little soft over there, but as Mr. Ferbert said, we could put some cement on it, make it quite heavy. But, you know, there are risks, and there are catastrophes, and there are earthquakes, and they happen all over the world. If we make an educated decision that is the best way forward for our country and our fiscal crisis is to repair for the time being. And by the way, we could repair to make it last 15 years, spend $100 million to keep it running, fix the roof and do the things. We would save ourselves in that period 27 plus 3 for the Quango, $30 million a year. That's $455 million that we could save, and we would spend 100. And then we could reevaluate the need to build the airport again, based on the circumstances. And we know better what the arrivals are. So all of these are educated approaches. If there's a catastrophe, we react as they do anywhere else in the world. We do our best, we put up tents, we do what we can to keep the runways and the airplanes going. I mean, that's just a matter of reaction to a situation.
Mr. Mayor, I just want you to repeat that statement again because I think it's important. You said that if we were to spend $100 million to repair or extend, you said that we would save how much money? Over 15 years?
This is just a number that's an educated number. It's not research. But broadly speaking, if we're giving $27 million a year to ACON as their compensation to build and operate, and if we're going to spend $3 million a year on a Quango to go that route, G2G, then if we didn't go that route, we could keep the revenues of 27 and the expenses of $30 million a year. Okay? Over 15, that's $450 million. And if it costs $60 million, as it said in the cost comparison, to fix the repairs right away and another 104 to do the capital work, that's 160. Maybe for $100 million, we can do what it takes to get 10 years of good first-class service out of the airport. So we would spend 100, we would save 455, we would have a net saving of deficit debt on our financial statements of the difference, $350 million.
Okay.
And then we would know better the future for arrivals and what size airport we should have, and we could build the then cost. But we'd have money in the bank, and we'd be in a much better position to make a decision.
So in your view, if we were to repair and extend the life versus building the new over 15 years, you say we can save around $300 to $350 million will reduce the amount of increased debt by that much. So we would not be increasing our debt as much as we would be under this present arrangement.
And remember, those are just broad numbers, but they're sensible, practical numbers.
Well, as we heard from the financial secretary earlier, these are just estimates.
Of course, well, that's another estimate. But yes, we should save quite a bit of money, which is beneficial in all the ways, particularly in time of a fiscal crisis that we're in.
Great.
In isolation, I don't believe, I'm not a credit rater, but logic tells me it's not going to be a serious impact, one transaction. But it's the added cumulative effect of debt that is what's going to affect our rating. So we add 100 to 2.4, and we borrow another 200 this year, so we're up to 2.7. That is what the rating agency is going to look at. And what is the trend moving forward? Do we expect the deficits to be eliminated or to grow or to create surpluses? Is our debt moving up or down? And it's that cumulative effect that causes the scores, if we're going down in our performance, scores to go against us, ultimately leading to a downgrade.
Putting a roof on it and plugging up leaks, I don't think is what we want in this jurisdiction. We're a first-class jurisdiction. So we don't want to have an airport with Band-Aids and all kinds of other things, just fix me up until we can get it to where we want to be. I agree with you in terms of due diligence. We should practice our due diligence. We should make sure that we have examined every option and that we have exercised the best option for the people of this island and economically and financially, and I think that the government has done that. I would like to thank you for the time that you have expended in producing this report and for your concern and care for the citizens of this country, because we should all care about what we're doing and what we're spending and how we're going to get there. It's very important. What we do now will impact those that are going to be left behind after we're gone. So it's important. So thank you for what you've done. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
And before
Yeah, I think what most people don't realize that if you don't get a grip of our debt, we won't have a first-class jurisdiction. There's no doubt. In fact, if international business, if our rating goes so low, international business would run for cover because they can't borrow what they based on the, and there will be a lot more people out of jobs. One question I wanted to ask you because I thought once I saw a picture where the government had us the water floating in the arrival section, in the departure section at the airport. I have never seen that water level that high, but you talk about the WADE unlikely to survive Category 4 hurricane storm surge. Can you talk about this a little more in your paper here?
Yes, I'd be happy to. My information, of course, comes from the HNTB 2006 master plan. And in there, it is quite clear. They talk about the ability of Wade and also the new airport at the planned current situation to survive Category 4 storm surge. And they said that both those locations, the new airport and Wade, are equally susceptible to flooding from storm surge, both of them. Now, in the case of the new airport, the plan is to landfill and to raise the height of the building. In the case of Wade, they said a storm surge, a berm would take care of that from where the landfill is around to Watford Bridge. In the case of the new airport, if you went that route, from Watford Bridge, Causeway, I live in Somerset, all the way around to Ferry Reach, you'd have to build a berm there so that the new airport would be protected on both sides equally from storm surge. They built the berm, and by the way, the cost of the one for the new airport would have been $2 million, and the one for Wade was $1 million. Not a lot of money to build that berm. They built a berm. I don't know whether it was to spec, but clearly it's not high enough to stop the waves that are cascading in, have them just dribble over the top. So what would it cost, and how far would we have to raise the height of that so it does its job? These are common practice for rising tides and surges. Does it have to come up 3 feet, 6 feet, 9 feet? What do we have to do as HNTB said, to make it protected from Category 4 storm surge? That's what we mean by a berm. That's the protection, and intuitively, it should be very much able to be done and not at great cost, unless HNTB are talking gobbledygook.
Mm-hmm. And one last question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one last question.
I'm going to go.
A lot of the government's assumptions is regarding the increase in tourist arrivals, where you talk about the invalid assumption by the government regarding arrivals. And if the arrivals does not meet those numbers, then we may be dipping more in our pockets than ever before, particularly the minimum revenue, which the secretary spoke about just now. Can you talk about a little more about your concern about the arrivals?
Well, passenger traffic is the heart of the business.
Say it again.
Passenger traffic,
Yes,
arrivals,
that's right.
is the heart of the business. And the projection of what is expected, we've plummeted from 540,000 to 385,000, 60% decline since 1980. It's straight down.
300, we're not 385.
85, yeah.
Not 300. Air arrivals.
Air arrivals, yeah.
Arrivals, I think it was 200 something.
No, it's about 385. Anyway,
Yeah.
there's been a massive decrease, and the question is, where is that going? Is it going down? Is it going sideways? Is it going up? And by how much? I don't think anybody in this room could make a better, more educated guess than anybody else. It's just not a known number. Why? There are no benchmarks. There are no comparables. Traffic between London and New York has got nothing to do with traffic between London and Bermuda. Caribbean to U.S. has got nothing to do with the travel Bermuda to the U.S. In the 2006 report, they did a study. There were no known benchmarks, but Airbus had done a study of the world for projecting aircraft demand. They had done the Caribbean as a separate section. The Bermuda government and HNTB took those numbers and modified them slightly, and they came up with a projection that was way above what actually happened. The projection of arrivals in 2000, well, excuse me, can't remember. Up until recently, 2015, there we go, their projected arrivals were 35% over what happened. Why? Because there is no benchmark. You just can't project what they are. So arrivals are the heart of the business. The government has made forecasts of what the arrivals departures will be for the next 30 years, term of the concession. Total uncertainty about whether that's right. If the arrivals turn out to be less than what they forecast, that means that the revenues, the net cash flows at the airport will be much less than they assumed, which means that the government, which will mean that they can't necessarily pay their debt service, and they can't maintain the investment grade that they have to do on their bonds. The government will be called in with its revenue guarantee to top it up, to make payments. And we don't know what those forecasts will be. We have no certainty about the guarantees. But if our traffic slips below what they expected, we're in trouble. One last thing, very important thing. When Deloitte looked at the projections in the report, CCC had just looked at 4 assumptions. They hadn't projected. They said, here's how the costs are and how it runs. 4 slow rising growth, middle rising growth, a bit more. 4 growth scenarios of airport arrivals is all they looked at. They didn't look at what the economics would be if they went sideways, the arrivals, or whether they went down. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of risk, and differences between the projection and reality will drive what extra money we have to pay out in our guarantee, and it could be very significant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I have a question, and I know that MP Souza has a question, and then we're probably going to have to wrap up. But there was a lot said before in the previous session of speaking with the financial secretary about the fact that the government of Bermuda is technically guaranteeing this project. And there's this whole talk about whether or not we're actually guaranteeing it because it's off-balance sheet financing. And, you know, with the financial secretary said we're not guaranteeing the debt, we're only guaranteeing some of the repayments of the debt in case they fall short. But the way that I look at it, of course, is that any type of guarantee means that the government of Bermuda is exposed to additional risk, and we're not transferring all of that risk onto the private partner. One of the things which you stated in your report is that you said because the government of Bermuda has said that this is completely off-balance sheet financing. And we know we've heard that before. We heard that with Enron and WorldCom, completely off-balance sheet, things that might not be the best way. But in your response, you said the Ministry of Finance incorrectly stated that the design, build, fix, operate, and maintain model and the government-to-government scenarios where the airport is financed completely off of the government of Bermuda's balance sheet, where it means the government is not liable for the repayment of the debt. And you go on to say that under generally accepted accounting principles, the revenue guarantee provided to Project Co. will be recorded as a contingent liability in the notes to the government of Bermuda's balance sheet. Increased liabilities will impoverish government of Bermuda's financial strength, debt capacity, and credit ratings. With excessive debt of $2.4 billion now and declining ratings, this loss of debt capacity increases the risk of default. By comparison, under standalone financing, Project Co loans would not be recorded in Government of Bermuda financials and would therefore have no effect on Government of Bermuda debt and credit rating. So what you're saying is, if Project Co was borrowing the money actually completely off balance sheet, it wouldn't affect us. But what you're saying is, because we're still somehow guaranteeing the money, it is not completely off balance sheet. Can you just expand on that or confirm what I'm saying?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay.
The borrowing by Project Co requires the revenue guarantee. If there were no revenue guarantee, it did it because it could make this deal fly on the revenues of the airport. It would have no effect. It wouldn't be recorded. It wouldn't have anything to do. But because it doesn't fly economically, they can't make it work without the guarantee, the revenue guarantee, the support. It is recorded, as all other obligations like that, as a contingent liability.
Okay.
That is tantamount to liability when it comes to credit ratings.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. MP Souza?
Thank you, Chair. And I also would like to add my thanks for you doing this report, because it's great when Bermudans do show concern about their island home. You did mention earlier that, that you're concerned of future recession. And of course, we all have a difficult time predicting things like that. But I'm sure everyone here and everyone listening would agree that the next couple of years in Bermuda, the next decade, and I would go as far as saying beyond, are going to be unprecedented years in Bermuda in terms of growth. Just yesterday, we saw Lonely Planet state that Bermuda is one of the top 10 places that people should go in 2017. We see a new hotel in St. George's. We see Morgan's Point, which will be a $2 billion project to this country in the next decade. And with all this growth, so surely, there's growth taking place there. And what myself, as a very practical man, would want to be offering a first-class airport for people that we greet them, because it's first-hand impression. And, so I'm myself personally, as you've heard, I'm all for having this airport. So you're proposing that government borrow more money to pay for repair? That's what I'm understanding, correct?
Government's proposing that it borrows another $1.4 billion to build a new airport.
Oh.
That's what it's going to cost. 885 plus the missing revenue, 810.
Ah.
I'm not proposing anything. I'm saying that you and I and the government of Bermuda should think carefully about that alternative and all the benefits versus the alternative of repairing Wade at some cost, which they've estimated, which may or may not be the right number, and think about what makes the most sense to us as a country. When we are close to bankrupt, we can't afford to inject $1.4 billion into the economy right now. We can't. The credit raters will tell you that that's not the case. And don't tell me so much about what just happened with the financing, but I can tell you that interest rates have plummeted in the last several years to historically low levels. So the cost of borrowing has plummeted also. Institutions are awash in money. They're not invested, they're sitting on cash, and they're looking for ways to invest it. Yes, our costs fell, but I can tell you that the cost of borrowing for Bermuda is 1.5% higher than the cost of a AAA corporation in the U.S. The Bermuda government is considered to be that much more at risk than a corporation, a AAA corporation. Don't think that we are doing so well with our sovereign ratings in terms of the global availability of cash. Money is awash today. So I don't think we should spend any money on any project until we're sure that, particularly a large amount, we're doing the right thing. Let's not build an airport like they did in St. Helena. A bad comparison with airports, but find out that it can't be used. Let's not build what is a world-class airport? What on earth is that? This island has survived all these years with a first-class airport. Nobody complains. Yes, it rains and we complain. Millions of visitors have come here. Millions of Bermudians go in and out over the years. What is wrong with this airport? But the question is, what do we need? And how can we solve it? Do we need a world-class? Do we need to repair? What do we need? We're in trouble. How much can we spend and for what?
Mr. Mayor, I don't know if this is it a proper question?
Go ahead.
Why, sorry, as I said, I'm not an accountant, but what's the difference between calculating the cost of borrowing the money and repaying based on net present value as opposed to doing it on the future value? Because the value of the money now is not going to be the same later, right?
The whole purpose of a net present value is to assume a certain interest rate and discount back using that rate $100 million in 10 years' time. What will we start with today? $50 million and grow it at 6%. What does it take to take it to 100? So we bring back all these future values to the same comparative value today. with the incremental cash analysis, which is used for internal rates of return, for NPVs, and so forth. We look at only the new revenues, expenses, or changes in those that this project causes, and we add them all up. What we do is NPV them. But what they all add up to without discounting them is the cash in, out that's going to go through the financial statements. So that's the difference.
So what you're saying is the government, in using the net present value metrics, doesn't give an accurate picture of the actual impact in the future on debt.
Gives no impression, no accuracy whatsoever. It has nothing to do with what goes through the financial statements.
Okay, excellent.
Sorry, just to clarify, it's used to find out if you're doing a project, whichever one NPV calculated gives you the most cash, that's deemed to be the most benefit to the company. Least expense, the best.
Well, we're at 4:43 p.m., so we've got to get going. I want to thank you very much for your time, Mr. Mayor, and I want to thank you, like as many members of the committee have thanked you for your work. I recall that I had an argument in 2015 with an international business executive about the airport project, and they said, well, I'm going to go ahead and do an analysis so we can be comparing the figures. And I never did get that analysis from him, but I'm happy that you've taken this time to prepare this analysis, and I would just like you to continue to express your civic right to go ahead and to speak as much as you can, and to make sure that you inform the people of Bermuda on your views on what this project will mean, and especially the amount of additional debt that you were stating that this project will mean to the government of Bermuda going forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you all very much. Members, this will adjourn our public meeting of the our public session of the Public Accounts Committee for today. I hope you found it informative.